Welcome to the Consumer Code Show, where we believe that humans are incredible and we are living in a first era in history where behavioral data and AI have hit scale so we can go from consumer insight to business activation in no time. In this show, we explore the world of retail through the lens of demography, cartography, ethnography, and the economy. So without further ado, let's get into this episode. Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm joined by Bryan Chandler. He is a partner and managing director at the Shopping Center Group. So before Bryan started the Shopping Center Group, he actually ran retail stores. Then he got a master's degree in GIS, and he built up the retail intelligence practice at TSCG. And Bryan, that's how we got to meet. And I was looking back at my emails. I was like, how long have I known Bryan? It's about 6 years. It's 2019.
Yeah, it's been some years,
Yeah.
been some time.
Yeah, lots of emails back through there. I was scrolling for a while. But he also writes Map to Market, which is a really good retail and GIS newsletter that I would highly recommend on LinkedIn. So welcome, Bryan.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. So let's get right into this. So we've known each other for a long time, but I would like to start. Can you tell me a little bit about what TSCG does so people get your context?
Sure. So TSCG is a commercial real estate brokerage advisory services firm, but we're hyper-focused on retail. So, if you compare us to like the bigger three, like the JLL, CBRE, Cushman, Wakefields of the world, where they kind of focus on all different facets of commercial real estate, it could be industrial, could be office, could be retail. We stay within the lanes of retail. When we go very deep in understanding what's happening, we build very deep relationships with our clients. And so we're sort of the experts in the world of retail within that kind of industry of commercial real estate.
So you said a lot of words, commercial real estate advisory practice. So what all does that entail?
Yeah. So in the world of commercial real estate, we're really working with different clients. So it could be tenant representation, where we're working directly with the brand, helping them find locations or understanding a market where they need to be. So that's a direct relationship with the brand itself. And we can represent them in multiple offices or in different regions. And in some cases, it could be we could represent one brand within a category and we can represent their competitor in a different market. But we do it in a way where none of that kind of secret sauce or that understanding of what makes them successful, that all stays private. We could represent the landlord. So our leasing team represents the landlord who owns the asset. And for them, it's about finding and attracting brands into a space, right? So is it the right merchandising mix? Are they maximizing the potential of that particular asset? For the asset owners, it's really about growing the NOI of the asset, because most of them aren't going to hold it forever unless it's like a private investor, private developer. Most of the larger shopping centers that you see, and we tend to focus on shopping centers, right? So grocery anchored shopping centers are sort of 5 to 10 bay strip centers. That's kind of our sweet spot. We help them build up that value and then potentially down the road, even look to help them sell it with our investment sales team.
Yeah. And then within that, you've built up the retail intelligence function. Can you kind of give us a view on why TSCG thought that was an important piece, like the tech to really build out, and just tell us about that group too.
Yeah, so our analytics really was born out of the need to help our clients. And then we began to sort of double down on it. We realized that, we could become sort of a leading voice or an expert in this field. And so about 8 years ago, we went through and basically looked at our team, which was about 25 at the time. So we had these admin GIS combination roles, and we decided to sort of break those two responsibilities apart. And so now we have a team of 18. All but one of them they have at least an undergrad in GIS or some sort of geospatial related field. The one that doesn't has been doing this for 25 years, so she's definitely experienced. But doing that allowed us to let geospatial experts do geospatial things, and it allowed us to go much deeper. We began to bring in things like mobile location data. We were one of the first that really, I think, began to push that within our organization. we began to go pretty deep on things like psychographic. So looking beyond
Yeah.
just traditional demographics. And now we're doing things like building our own data set. And so it's
Yes.
really kind of started as something that our clients were asking for. And now we're at the point now where we're beginning to create our own data.
Yeah, let's put a pin on that building your own data set. I know what you're talking about, and we'll talk about that in a little bit because that's pretty exciting. Um, but you actually started by working at retail stores, which I feel like is such a unique thing about you. It was it grocery stores, and what were you doing there?
At one point it was. So my family has been in retail ever since I've been alive. My father worked in retail with Kmart at Kmart's kind of peak. And so, as a kid, I remember playing in layaways and, helping, the layaway associates go find packages and get them to the customers. Um, I never imagined that I would work in retail, but that's just kind of how things worked out. So as I grew up, I had part-time jobs in retail. When I got out of college, I became a gardens center manager, which was really kind of eye-opening for me because I had the ability to buy merchandise. So in some ways, I started to really, I think, lay some foundation in terms of like understanding customer because I
Yeah,
had to
okay.
know what people were buying, what they wanted to put into their yards, what um, the local region allowed, because I had access to all of these different SKUs, right, in terms of plants, but I had to know, what actually worked here. So that was kind of my first foray into really understanding the customer. But I went on to do operations, overnight replenishment management, and Kmart supercenters. I grew from there to running linens and things stores. So at one time, I was one of the youngest store managers in linens and things. And I began just taking over stores that needed to be fixed. And that kind of became my role. So I hopped from store to store. I was young and I wasn't married at the time. Um, and then finally, I landed at Party City. And it was there that um, we got pregnant, and my wife was basically like, this nights and weekend stuff in retail isn't going to work. You need to find something else to do. And so I went back to school and I landed on GIS and
Man.
been there ever since.
Okay, so I mean, I get that. You've got this kid and you were like, okay, I can't be not like pushing all this nights and weekends. At what point does the idea of GIS spark? Why GIS?
So when I originally went back to school, I went back to do forensic accounting, and I got into it, and I was like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And so I took the course catalog from the college I was attending. And I remember, I think it was like 10, 11 o'clock at night. I was just flipping through, like, I got to find some different major. Like, this isn't going to work. And I came across geographic information science. And as I started to read what the course was, or the major was, um, I think it scratched an itch that I had ever since probably I was a kid. Like, I remember wasting hours and hours playing SimCity,
Hmm.
building up different cities and understanding how, road networks and civic buildings and all these different factors came into play to help create a thriving city. And I think that was what probably hooked me. And then as I got into the program, I love this idea of um, like everything being a data point. You can turn anything into a data point, and then from there you can do all these amazing, analytics things to it, and really begin to understand how one thing affects another, and um, the visualizations and the systems, and it all was just super interesting to me. And so I think it's one of the things that allows GIS people to really be passionate about what they do, because there's such a variety of stuff that you can do in the world of GIS. I mean, if I get annoyed with a visualization I can't get right, I can always just hop over and start working on some sort of data schema thing. And then when I get tired of working with, Python and all of that, I can hop back over and play in the world of cartography. So it was a very fortuitous event finding GIS, and I've loved it ever since.
I mean, you didn't just get an undergraduate; you also got a master's in it. So clearly, you loved it. And you're you shouldn't be doing this. because I've got this theory that I've continued to build up that there's two commonalities for people that get into GIS. One is SimCity, two is Tolkien. You dig far back enough, they got into maps because of those Tolkien maps and Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
or they're into Sims. For me, it was both. And it was SimCity first, probably. It's SimCity
Yeah.
2000, which was like it was so simple and it was so fun. Like running
It
the
was so
pipes under the
addicting, right?
networks and the grids. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think next portion is I really want to get a understanding of the spatial retail fabric. So you talk about this in Map to Market. And
Mhm.
part of this is my own curiosity and getting a better understanding of like the retailer and broker and the property owner relationship and how that works and how the dark data, as you say, sort of flows through that. So in one of your articles, you say when deals really happen, they happen inside of this spatial retail fabric. Can you kind of explain what that retail fabric is?
Yeah, so it's kind of a play on, the fabric of space and time, and if you're a little bit of a nerd like me, I love trying to understand, like, gravity waves through space and how that affects and manipulates light and all of that kind of crazy stuff that's about the stars. But I think using this concept of the retail spatial fabric is a play on that. And what it really is trying to describe is that, like, retail decisions don't happen in a vacuum,
Hmm.
right? There's all of these different factors that come into play, some of which we can get data around, but some of it, this kind of ties to that dark data, if you're into the space thing, like dark matter, right? We know it's there, but we don't know what it is. It it kind of encapsulates that as well, right? So, we can look at things like zoning, we can look at things like, the parcels, the rent, we can look at the demographics, the psychographics, traffic patterns, traffic flows, all that kind of stuff. We have data points around all that. But there's also these sort of intangible things, the look and feel of the facade of the building that isn't really captured in a data set, right? That's kind of like your local broker being able to come in and say, like, "Man, this building it sits in a great spot. It looks tired. Like, does that fit your brand?" Right? Things like curb cuts, right? Can traffic, yeah, there's a ton of traffic that's going past the front of this particular site, but can they actually make a turn into this site? Or they have to go a quarter mile down the road, make some kind of crazy U-turn and actually find entry into this location? And so it's all of these different components that, even things like competition, where is your competition located? Where are your, um, these co-tenants that maybe you track and follow? Like, where does all of these things sit kind of within this space that will allow you to be successful in that particular location? So it's kind of an easy way to kind of encapsulate that whole concept. And I think it's a really good visualization because, you know, as you begin to layer in all these different, kind of weave them all together, it paints this sort of picture, this fabric of how retail operates within a given area.
Um, let's maybe dig in a little bit more into dark data, and I'd like to hear kind of about how that something that you can't capture in the data set. How have you seen that actually impact a retail deal where you had maybe like a broker in the market that had a knowledge of this and it changed direction for what you would have done?
Yeah, so I mean, I think when we when we talk about our tenant representation brokers, we like to say, it's local market knowledge that they bring, and a lot of that local market knowledge is this sort of dark data, right? It's things that aren't captured in systems. It's not captured in the data that you can buy third party. It's not coming from the Census Bureau. It is really this idea of they have relationships with other people within the industry. It could be developers, could be, capital finance guys. It could be other brokers that they're chatting it up with on the golf course, right? It's this sort of insider knowledge that they build up. I mean, it's really kind of the primary value that a broker brings to the table. Um, but it's really what allows them to help and guide brands to get to a decision that they may not otherwise have been able to do without sort of that dark uncaptured data, right? If you go to any of our brokers, um, they're going to have this sort of set of information that they hold very close to their vest, right? It's not something that they inherently want to share, so from a corporate standpoint, right, from my side of the table, we're always trying to like get more information out of them, like share some
Hmm.
of this dark information. We can capture it. We have this amazing, GIS system. We can catalog it and we can make it easily findable, searchable. You can build on insights. They're sometimes very reluctant to do that. Um, but it is interesting to see when from a GIS perspective, from an analytics perspective, we can bring all of the data that we have to the table and do this fantastic analysis. And it sometimes is a piece of information that a broker has. It could be about a tenant 3 doors or three shopping centers down that they've gone into that space. They've walked the shop floor. They can see that that retailer is struggling, right? It could
Hmm.
be a store staff, store management situation. It could be that they've heard rumors, from the leasing teams maybe that, hey, we're going to have 5,000 square foot space available, and they know the markets well enough to know what brands are operating in 5,000 square feet, and usually they can narrow it down. So it's that sort of information where that space may not currently be getting marketed, but it is an option for a brand, and it actually might be the better location for that brand. And
Hmm.
so they can advise their clients that, we know you want to be in this market. Let me see if I can work with the landlord and get them out and we can put you in, or we can say, you know, let's put a pin in this market. There's going to be a space available. You don't need to make a move right now. We can focus somewhere else. Let's just hold tight. This space will come available. And if you're willing to pay this rent, we can get you into that space.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So one is this is a conclusion I continue to come to the more I dig into this, but boots on the ground is just so important. And we know this. It's like it is paramount. I'm even to the point where I think boots on the ground is actually the number one thing that you can do in analytics, just get you to better boots on the ground. That's one piece. But there's also this piece that the brokers can get a feel for, a sense for, of things that have not happened yet. Right. So like the data is not even there for it to have happened. The tenant hasn't churned, but
Right.
they never sense that it's going to. So that's interesting. It's like these are just like conversations that they can pick up that it would literally be false if you captured that in data right now, but they have a sense of the future. Okay, so let's talk about incentives because I'm a rookie at this and I'm looking at it from the outside and I'm just going to say something. You can tell me where I'm wrong here. Okay. So, if you're representing a retail property and you're a broker, it feels like so you're representing the property. It feels
Mhm.
like your job is like get a tenant in there as fast as possible that's paying rent. You make some commissions off of that, but like who cares if they turn? That's just another property for me to land again. Am I not thinking about this right? It just what?
Yeah, I think there's a different aspect that you need to factor in. So if you take a shopping center, right, and this some of this is dependent on who actually owns the asset. If you're a private developer, a local family who might do development, build some strip centers, right? Some of that is like we want to have somebody in there paying rent. We don't really
Yep.
care. If you're like a large REIT, right, who you own hundreds of properties, an empty bay isn't going to move the needle necessarily, right? Like you losing out on some rent isn't going to make or break the asset. For them, we're going to buy it, we're going to hold it for a set number of years. Our focus is we got to increase the overall value of the
Yep.
property. So
That's
when
an
we get to the
NOI,
point of
not net
selling, it's an
operating
NOI.
income.
Right. So for them, it's more important about bringing in, regional, national, well-credited tenants who can pay, higher rents. Right? They're not necessarily as affected by smaller movements in the economy, right?
Hmm.
They feel very comfortable that by the time they get to that, let's say it's a 10-year plan, that Like a good leasing team will have evaluated the market. They'll know where the market is moving from a consumer base. And their job is to find and attract tenants that maximize the value that
Of the
that space
asset.
can provide. Right. So it may not, it may not work right now for that particular space, but their job is to find and get those tenants in so that when they get to that 10-year, the NOI is there. It drives up the value. That REIT can sell that property and make as much money out of it as possible. And then they move on to the next.
That's at the higher level, but is the agent, like, how they are aligned to make that full asset valuable?
For them, I mean, yes, part of their commission comes on doing transaction, but it's also you want to be seen not as being selfish. Like you're there to
Mhm,
work
mhm.
with um, that particular asset owner. So it is a balancing act. Yes, you do want to find tenants and bring them in, but you don't want to just scattershot brands at a space. I think what ends up happening is you don't get seen as being working in the best interest of the asset,
Right.
right? So it
Yep.
might be short term gain, but over the long term, you're damaging your credibility and sort of professional standing, with an asset owner.
That's helpful. This market has changed though since 2019. Now we have like super low space availability. How's that dynamic changing?
So before I would say brands had much more power at the negotiating table, but because of the very low vacancy rates, and then additionally just the market in general, um, that power has definitely shifted back over to the landlord side. They're able to drive up rents. They're able to reduce the amount of tenant improvement dollars that they're offering, and so the the brands have to be willing to sort of now pay up, whereas before they could say like, I have three different options. I can go in this market in one of these three different places. If you want me, you need to give me something here. Like we need lower rents, we need more TI dollars. That kind of has evaporated. And so now asset owners, like the landlords themselves, are the ones now dictating in a lot of cases the rents that a lot of these brands are paying. So um, it definitely has changed. Some brands are having more struggles with trying to operate, within this space now because if you're an asset owner, again, you're trying to drive up the NOI, and the NOI comes from rent. And so there's pressure on their side to get the most out of the brands. And then conversely, if you're a brand, you're trying to do your thing and limit the cost of doing business. And one of those major costs is rent. So I think if nothing changes in the next year, I think you're going to start to see brands, and then some brands are already starting to do this. They're looking at sort of alternative markets or alternative, um, secondary markets within a MSA that they may not have traditionally gone into, but they're rethinking sort of their store footprint. How much space do they really need, and going into markets that they traditionally wouldn't have gone into because they need to continue to grow, but they don't need as much space or they don't need as much product. So they're rethinking their store designs, rethinking their operations, and it's what's allowing them to shift, go to that second tier market and continue to operate and do business and sort of almost, skip over some of these asset owners who are standing firm on keeping rents where they are, driving them up.
Yeah. This is a hard market for real estate, but if we, take our Sim City eyes at this, honestly, it feels like net positive for cities and communities because you have the property owner that is has the power to now make really good selections of the type of tenants that are going to be there, and they are incentivized to do that because they don't have a lot of space available. So they can get the right tenants in there, and then on the other side, if what you're saying is happening, so they're going to these secondary and tertiary markets. These are markets that are underserved in the first place that everyone is ignoring, and like this is what I'm super passionate about. If you just everybody's kind of aligned towards demographics, go for the high income, go for the people that have the money, and like we know that if you fit it to the community right, people will find money for things that they care to buy, and if those secondary markets are chosen well, I think that is just a net positive for everyone that lives around there, and I guess that's kind of exciting to me. But maybe just to wrap that up, my light bulbs there is, I guess I didn't fully understand how the incentives actually are more lined up than what I would have expected them to be for that retailer, broker, and property owner relationship. Maybe let's just end this particular segment on, what do you feel like is a great model for all three of these things aligning? What should be, and we mainly work with retailers, so what should a retailer be thinking about to make that relationship work?
I think that a retailer has to understand, and I'm sure they do, they have to understand all the different parties and what is sort of motivating each of them in the grand scheme of things, right? And be open to hearing alternatives. There's a lot of times where I think brands get hyper fixated on what they think they know about a particular place or about a particular market. And they can go into a negotiation and say, like, well, we want to be here and you need to drive down rents. I think if they were smarter, lean on your brokers. Good brokers will bring alternatives to the table. They'll figure out how to get around roadblocks. They have relationships that they can network through, and it might surface an alternative location that actually might work out better for you. Think on the asset owner side, think about your full portfolio, right? Is there a space in another shopping center that you might own, or, something that might be coming to market where it might not work for this particular deal, but if you can help that retailer find a space, it may not be in your particular property, but if you can get them into the market and I have a property coming up where I would love to have this brand, that's going to pay dividends in the longer run, right? That brand was going to come back and say, okay, you helped me here. We want to be in that particular shopping center. Let's now talk about that one.
Let's talk about new data sources, because as you mentioned, you guys are early adopters of these things. You test them out, way before the market usually does, and get a good sense of them. Um, Tell us about mobile data. You guys were one of the first people to use that. Can you give us a sense of like a moment where you remember it really changed the way that you were thinking about site selection for a particular retailer?
Yeah. So I think it was probably 7 or 8 years ago. It was really early on when I started working with TSCG. We heard about this data set, mobile location data, and we were actually buying it from a company called AirSage. I don't even know if it still exists. It was super difficult to work with. Anytime I remember, as we started to push it into the organization, I was telling my boss at the time, I was like, be careful about how many people we're telling this to, because this takes like 3 hours to create one trade area map. Like, we don't have enough people on our team to be able to create these at scale. And so he's like, okay, but this is cool. We got to start doing this. And we ran an analysis on Cumberland Mall, which is a mall here close to our office, sort of at the kind of the northwestern corner of Atlanta. But if you look at where it sits in relation to income, you have two of the wealthiest zip codes in the entire Atlanta MSA. And if you were to draw just a radius ring or even a 5-10 minute drive time, it would show that you would be capturing a lot of that income, right? And so we actually then took mobile location data. We were going to test whether or not that was actually true. And what we found was most of the traffic that was coming to the Cumberland Mall did not come from either of those two zip codes. It was going much farther north and kind of going out into the suburbs, but it was not attracting any of that wealth who we found was actually willing to drive further down to like Phipps Plaza and Lenox
Mm.
Mall. And so for us, that was one key moment where we realized, okay, mobile location data is extremely valuable. The other was brokers have long held this sort of notion, like, we have this we have 285 in Atlanta that basically encircles Atlanta. And if you're local, you'll hear people say like, "Oh, I'm ITP, I'm inside the perimeter," or "I'm OTP, outside the perimeter." And there was this thought like people don't cross the perimeter to go shopping. If I'm ITP, I'm staying ITP. If I'm OTP, I'm not going into Atlanta. And with mobile location data, we were able to prove that that wasn't the case. People were willing to cross, the interstate, and do their shopping. We saw it play out again with, water's usually a big thing. So if you're on the coast somewhere, people don't want to cross a bridge. That's not really necessarily true. Depends on what the brand is and what sort of that pull it has in the market. So for us, that was a clear sort of indication like, okay, this needs to become more foundational to what we do. And I don't think if you were to take 100 trade areas that we generate, 98% of them are gonna be created now using mobile location data. It's
Hmm.
pretty
Hmm.
rare that we still do a radius range or drive time.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think one of the things you're tuning me to is that I've always thought about like, mobile location data is good at showing you like there is a natural barrier and people won't go over that, but it also will show you there is a natural barrier that people will go over that you might not be able to pick that up with the drive time map.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that it also opened up for us was understanding cannibalization. It was probably one of the first data
Mm,
sets. Like if you weren't a brand yourself and you didn't have first party data where you were capturing, customer transaction or loyalty program in some way, mobile location data allowed you to begin to understand cannibalization. So there were some cases where we were able to use mobile location data for a site that was originally a no and turn it into a yes because we could
mhm.
prove that you need to be here. Your consumer is here. We tied it back to psychographics and demographics. Like this is a prime market for you to be in. And yes, there will be some cannibalization, but it's not nearly what you think it's going to be. And
Yeah.
so we were able to use that to convert a brand and get them to a yes.
Well, let's get into psychographic data, which that I love. Let's talk about were you using it before you were using mobile location data, and what is the actual utility of psychographic data?
We were. So we've been an Esri partner for quite a while. I think now going on 12 years, maybe even 13 years. So Tapestry was something that we had adopted back when we got Esri. And so for us, we recognized very early on that while demographics are important, you needed a way to compare apples to apples across regions, right? And Tapestry is really what allows you to do that. I think one of the best examples that I've seen is, if you look at, you know, King Charles now, and you look at Ozzy Osbourne, they both live in castles. They're both extremely wealthy, but you can imagine they probably don't have the similar shopping patterns, right? So I think for brands that we were supporting, it was a way for us to take and look at successes that they had had in other markets, and without having to get really deep into manipulating and creating these sort of factors to apply to raw demographic information, we could look at segmentation, understand what worked for them there, and find and replicate that success in other markets much more
Hmm.
effectively and simply than if we were to use traditional demographics to do so.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So there's like a combination of factors that are built within psychographics, and you could rebuild that combination of factors using demographic data, but it's hard to explain. It takes a lot of time to do. Why not just leverage something that's kind of pre-built like that to make those comparisons? Okay. Yeah, I get the utility there. Have you ever had an experience where the psychographic data set contradicted demographics?
Um, Not necessarily contradicted, but I think it helped to explain some maybe fuzziness, like these phenomena that they really couldn't explain. We did some work for a furniture company, and they had reached out to a very well known consulting firm, and they were looking at opening up a site in Chicago. And so they came to us. They said, "Hey, we're going to run two different analysis in parallel. We want to see what you're able to create versus what we're getting from this other brand." And so because they were furniture, we had store purchase orders, which captured all of the addresses. And so we began to kind of interrogate them and ask them questions like, okay, what do you think your customer looks like? What does the demographics look like? You know, what should we know about you as a company from your merchandising and kind of marketing standpoint that may impact your success that we should maybe factor in when we're looking at potential sites? And so they painted us this picture about, you know, upper income, more affluent, you know, traditionally female, uh, tended to skew to the, you know, white. And so, okay, great. As we began to dig into to their data, what we found was, yes, there was a component of their shoppers that looked like that. There was also this really interesting group that tended to be more Hispanic, right? And as we began to go even deeper, we realized that what they were buying, their purchases were actually of a higher dollar amount,
Hmm.
right? And so when we began looking in Chicago, we began to focus more on that. So we turned to psychographics. We could attribute a purchase to a psychographic segment. And then when we went into Chicago, we started like putting down sites. We calculated basically the revenue potential by taking that calculation that we had done and applying it to the market in Chicago. And so that was really sort of our first on the external side, one of the first applications of using Tapestry in that particular case to predict revenue. But it proved a point. And when the brand itself compared what we did to this other, we were almost identical
Hmm.
in
Wow.
terms of projection and revenue. And so it proved to us that one, we could do this and that it made actual sense for the brand. And I think it opened our eyes to the power when we have first party data and we can layer that on top of, you know, psychographics. It shows the power of having those two data sets combined.
How did that retailer respond to the customers not being exactly how they expected?
I think at first they were a little bit taken aback, like how no, we know our consumer. We know what our customer looks like. And we were like, well, but if you look at where the deliveries are being delivered, that's not what these people look like.
Hmm.
And so for them, it took a little bit of uh, kind of peeling back the curtain and be like, well, I think you need to go revisit a little bit maybe what your consumer base looks like. You're maybe missing a fairly significant segment of your consumer population. You're overlooking them right now, and you're not marketing to them. And so it was touchy. We had to approach that one delicately, but I think once they saw what we had done in the data and we could prove that we weren't making this up. This is what the data was, you know, boring out. mm, I think it opened up their eyes to the potential now because there's only so many markets that this furniture store kind of fit into. We just now gave them 25 other markets that they could expand into.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, you just unlocked a bunch for them. I'm curious for you because you've been a buyer in this, and there's other people on this show that are listening to this that are also buyers. With mobile data and psychographic data, what are some of the due diligence questions that you ask? And maybe this is just true with any data set. Like, what are you curious about?
We really want to understand the data at a foundational level. So whether it be, you know, mobile location data, and you know, my predecessor was really big within the industry of getting them to understand what mobile location data was and what it wasn't, because people were trying to apply it to all sorts of things. And if you don't know what the ingredients were, you could be making some assumptions here, and be wildly off.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm aligned with you on really understanding where it comes from. I think some of the problems is sometimes the salespeople don't actually know where it comes from, or they're just not wanting to say, and that's to me, I think that's a problem because we can start not trusting it for things. and then we just quit using it. And then we don't want to do that either. Like, it's no data set is perfect. No data set is perfect. And so you just need to understand what are the underlying ingredients that could be wrong, so that you can look at something that is a anomaly, and then you can discern whether it is inaccurate or accurate, and compare it. We're kind of on the topic of data sets. Can you tell us a little bit about the data sets you're developing at TSCG?
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, we had this idea, and it was born out of a challenge. We're trying to do white space analysis for a brand. And when you're looking at a particular market and you're applying the traditional, let's look at income, let's look at psychographics, right? Let's look at maybe even drive times. You could end up with thousands of points on a map as potential opportunities for this particular brand to go into. And that's a ton of data to have to weed through to get down to maybe 5 locations. And so we wanted to take a stab at, is there a better, much more convenient way? And what we ended up coming up with was basically looking at retail POI itself, and then going back to what we were saying about, central place theory and kind of understanding how development of retail works. We figured out that we could essentially look at the retail points of interest, in space. We could cluster those together. So we spent numerous months tweaking a model, teaching the computer, like, what does a retail node look like in data? And then we clustered the clusters because, typically there's a couple different retail nodes within what we would call like a retail market. And then once we had that built out, we basically assigned block groups within proximity to those retail clusters and created these ideas around like markets. Like, if
Hmm.
you're a consumer, you may cross a boundary, but the majority of your like retail shopping is probably going to take place within the market that you're within, right? And so we went through the whole process. We created these. There's now like 4,446 of them. There's no area in the United States that's not uncovered. Um, and we began to test it against what our agents, what our brokers had drawn as markets. And it, almost perfectly aligned.
Hmm.
And we felt like, okay, we're onto something here. And so we began to use it on our consulting side. So we have TSCG Intelligence, which, the GIS team that I manage is a part of, but we also have this group that focuses on external consulting. And so we began to apply it within those engagements. And the feedback that we got, because we can be doing this work outside of our like TSCG footprint, it could happen in Chicago, it could happen in Utah. What we found was that the shapes that we had drawn for markets, when we went to these other cities, the brokers were like, no, that makes complete sense. And so we felt like we were onto something. And so we're about to roll that out as a data product. And then on top of that, we're actually creating what we're calling market intelligence reports, which is this combination of AI, data that we have access to, and we're creating these narratives
Hmm.
using AI. So we're feeding the data, we're feeding maps into AI. We've taught AI how to interpret a map. And if you're a broker that maybe doesn't have a GIS group, there's these nice, well packaged reports that you can get access to that have all these narratives that talk about things like population. It talks about income. It talks about education. It's going to talk about retail development. And they're just these nice, well constructed paragraphs that you can turn to very quickly and get a good sense of what's happening in this market. If I use the markets, I do a white space analysis, and I now need to talk about those markets that we've identified. These are right there at your fingertips, and you can use them with your broker or with your retailer.
If you could leave retailers, brokers, or owners with one rule of thumb with working together in today's market, what would it be?
Find a way to bring your data analyst into the conversation. Um, the world of retail analytics has exploded, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years. There is so much data out there. If you're in the world of like real estate, there is no way you're going to be an expert in that. be open to bringing in either somebody on your team who is much more comfortable with those data sets, find somebody through one of your brokers that you're working with that understands that, but do not be afraid to get those people onto the call, to get them on the tour, to get them into the conversation somehow, some way, because I can guarantee you, as you begin to do that, they're gonna find and see things that you wouldn't inherently pay attention to that could really move the needle for you in some way or prevent you from making a very bad decision.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then if people wanted to connect with you or find Map to Market, what would they do?
I'm on LinkedIn, so it's I think it's Bryan G Chandler. Just find me out there.
Awesome. Rock and roll. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.